Let it out. Pretty.
Aren't you going to miss that? So today we are wrapping up our series called Detox. And the goal of the series, if you've been with us, I'm sure you've heard this before, right? Fifth time. The goal of this series is to identify and eliminate the things in our lives that destroy our relationships, the things in our lives that wreak havoc, the things in our lives that cause messes where messes don't need to be made. Now, what happens, especially in our area, right? I think this is a little bit more common than maybe in other areas, is the way that the idea of sin, right? Like not obeying what God wants us to do. The way that it was presented to a lot of us was that sin is, remember, wrong, right? And is that true? Well, kind of, right? It's a half-truth. It's not really the whole story. Because if we believe that sin is simply wrong, and it ends there, well, then that paints a picture of a God who's big, and we're small, and he wants us to do what he says because he's God, and we're not. And that's where you get this picture of an angry, rule-giving judge, the cosmic killjoy, right? But on week 1 of this series, we looked at a letter that was written by James, who's the brother of Jesus, and he kind of gives us the full story when it comes to this idea of sin. And he explains sin as not something that's simply wrong, but something that is, anybody? Toxic. Pretty good. Toxic. Meaning sin, right, if we put up with it, it starts to take root within us. It starts to rot us from the inside out, and ultimately, it hurts. It hurts sometimes immediately and sometimes later, but it is something that hurts us. And so the picture there that paints is of a God. Yes, he's bigger than us. Yes, we're small, but he is a God who loves us and who deeply is concerned about us thriving and flourishing. And so he wants us to stay away from these things that are toxic. So if you get nothing out of this series, right, if you've been here for 5 weeks and you get absolutely nothing out of it, our hope is that when you come into a situation where you're confronted with something where you know that God would consider this a sin, you don't stop and think, this is wrong. You think, this is going to come back to hurt me. This is toxic. So, on the first week, we talked about pride, right? And we kind of, the way we framed it, we talked about pride as this constant concern with yourself. Like, we kind of painted a picture of a courtroom, right? And it's this ongoing case for who I am and what I'm worth. And then we talked about shame. We talked about how shame is this constant feeling of never enough, and it will crush you. And ultimately, ironically, shame will make you not as capable of improving, right? It actually hurts us. It holds us back rather than motivating us and pushing us in the right direction. Last week, Tom talked about anger. He said really, like, at its core, what anger is this feeling like you owe me something. And now there's a debt-debtor relationship, right? And that what that can do is it can like actually tether us to that event and have some kind of a stronghold on your life, right? These things are all toxic. And today we're looking at our last toxin as we conclude the series. Now there are other toxins, but the last one we're going to cover in this series. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, but here's what I want you to think about. What comes to your mind when you think about the life, right? Like where everything is just right. You know? Most of us, when we think about that, we think maybe like the beach. You know, you're on the beach, sun shining, toes in the water, right? Everything's like really nice. Weather's perfect. For me, it's like, you know, when my kids go to bed, kind of the same thing. But that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like big picture life. What would you need to have to feel like everything was just right? Or we might say, how would you answer this question? Or fill in the blanks. Once I have, well, then I'll be. Like for some of us, maybe it's enough money saved up for retirement. For others of us, it's like, well, once I have my ideal career, well, then I'll be happy. For some, it's like, once I find that person, once I have this, once I have that. What is it that you need to have to feel like everything is just right? Some of you know that Jesus was a Jewish person, and the ancient Jewish people had a word that kind of captured this idea. It's a word, sometimes you hear it, maybe you've heard your Jewish friends say it, it's the word shalom. All right, and it has this idea of peace, but not just like peace like we're not fighting, not this kind of peace, but peace like it's a deep-rooted sense of satisfaction, of contentment. And it's something that we as people look for, like this feeling like everything is right. The toxin that we're looking at today, it promises life, but it leads you nowhere. It makes us think like once we have something, we will have arrived. We will have found what we're looking for, but it doesn't take you there. It's the road to nowhere, the road that has no end. And the thing about this is that it affects all of us, right? Church, unchurched, people who go to church all the time, people who've never been, maybe haven't been to church in decades. This is something that all of us, to some extent or another, have to wrestle with. It's a toxin that has the capability of hurting any and all of us. And so that's what we're going to look at today. There was a guy who was around just a little after the time that Jesus was around. His name was Luke. And one day Luke decided, okay, I'm going to go talk to everybody I know. I'm going to find out as much about Jesus as I can. And I'm going to try and put together a chronological account of everything we know about Jesus, or at least, some of the most important things. And so we call that the Gospel of Luke, the good news about Jesus according to Luke. And in that story, in that account, Luke tells us a story of this one time when Jesus was out teaching. Now, Jesus was super, super, super famous. Everybody wanted to come hear what he had to say. And so he had crowds coming to him. He had followers before people had followers on Instagram, right? There are people coming to him from everywhere. And it says in the passage that there were thousands, so much so that people were trampling one another to get to him, right? So picture this huge crowd all around Jesus. He's teaching, probably doing some crazy stuff. Somehow, some guy in the crowd weasels his way to the front. We don't know exactly how this worked, but it says, someone in the crowd said to him, imagine, breaks through, finally gets to the front. There he is. There's Jesus. I've made it through the thousand. He says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." He's come to tattle, right? He's made it before Jesus, and there's something that he wants from his brother. And Jesus replies, pretty nicely, I think. He says, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you?" Right? Kind of like saying, okay, you know what? Really, that's not my job to solve your personal issues here. And probably, the guy was totally justified in his request. Right? So if there was a dad who passed away, he would leave his inheritance to his sons, and that could be split up in different ways. But he should probably get at least some of it, so he's probably totally justified here. But Jesus doesn't really solve his problem, and instead he turns to the rest of the crowd, and he decides he's going to teach a lesson, and he says to them, "Watch out," to the crowd. "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Now, if I'm that guy who just, waited in line and pushed my way to the front and finally got to talk to Jesus, and then all of a sudden he's going to talk to me about greed, right? Or like use this as an opportunity to teach everybody else about greed, I'd be like, excuse me? Like, do you know me? And Jesus would be like, well, no, but yes. I don't know how that works. But here, again, we see somebody who is concerned about right and wrong, right? And Jesus steps in and says, again, kind of to everybody's surprise, hold on here. The danger in this situation is not whether or not you're going to get the money that you have, that you're entitled to. The danger here is that you're going to walk away harboring something within you that is toxic. Toxic. And so he says, watch out. Watch out for all kinds of greed. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Now, listen, there are teachings, just to kind of put this in perspective, there are teachings in the Bible about the damage that greed does to a society. You know how like when people have a lot and they don't give to the people who have a little, how that really does a lot of damage to society. There are teachings about how it's good to give to other people. This is not one of those teachings. This story is all about the toxic effects that my greed has on me. On me, that it's toxic. It's not just wrong, it's toxic. So before we jump into the specifics of our toxin today, here's a question I want to ask you. And if you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, you've probably seen that there's a little bit of discussion going on here. This question, true or false? More equals better. Is it better to have more? Now, typically when we think about this, right away, if I think about it, I'm thinking like, okay, the cost of more. Like, what is more going to cost me? That's how I determine whether or not more is better. So is it going to cost me, like, am I going to have to work more? And I'm talking specifically about money. Specifically about money. I'm going to have to work more to get more. Am I going to see my family less to get more, right? That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, is it always better to have more money, even if it's at no cost to you? So if you could be given $20 for something instead of $10, is it always better for you to have money? I'd argue we've been conditioned absolutely it's yes. Like it is dumb to leave money on the table, ever. Right? Is there ever a situation where if you work, somebody comes into your office and says, hey, we'd like to offer you more money? Is there ever a situation where you say, nope, don't need it, thank you? Because we've been conditioned to think that more is better. But think about this. If you're a parent, has there ever been a time when you have chosen to not give your child more, even when you could have? Probably. Because we know that having more of something is not always helpful, even if you can have more. Even if you can have more. Everyone in here probably knows or knows of somebody who was really once like a really nice guy, but then ran into a lot of money and just it ruined him. Even if it's at no cost to us, is more always better? My answer would be, it depends. It depends, and I think Jesus is going to kind of break this down. It's a complicated issue. I think Jesus is going to break this down for us a little bit. So he says, watch out. Be on your guard for all types of greed. Greed. In the original language, the word for greed in Greek, which is what the New Testament was written in, it literally means, it's the word to have and more put together. Like having more. It's the desire for more. We might call greed the endless pursuit of more. It's wanting more for the sake of having more. And so Jesus says, watch out. Be on your guard. Be careful with this, right? And he says something here everybody knows, but nobody really lives by, right? He says, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Life does not consist in more. Remember we were talking about that sense of like deep satisfaction, the feeling of like really living, like I have arrived. This is what I'm looking for. Jesus, there's a lot of different terms that would kind of describe this feeling that we're talking for. One of the words Jesus used is life. Sometimes he's talking about like eternal life. Sometimes he's talking about life here, right? Like this feeling of deep satisfaction, like you're living. His life is not found in the abundance of possessions. If your life is about more, it will never lead you there. If your life is about how far you can go, you will never go far enough. If your life is about how high you can climb, you will never climb high enough. If your life is about how much you can get, you will never feel like you have enough. Because life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. The more road does not lead to life. That's not a stop on that bus. It won't get you there. It won't get you there. We might say that it's like more is like greed is like getting on this hamster wheel. Right? You can get on it and you can start running and you can run faster and it'll move faster, but you won't get any closer to where you're trying to go. It will exhaust you. It might make you do things you wouldn't normally do. It might make you sacrifice things you normally wouldn't sacrifice. But you won't make any progress. You're just on the wheel going and going and going and going. Always looking for more. And what Jesus is saying is if you're looking for life, don't get on the hamster wheel, because more is not a road that leads there. It does not lead there. So there was a study done not too long ago. I thought it was interesting. It was all about overall life satisfaction. And what these people did was they took a group of people who had won the lottery, right? And they studied them. They followed them for years. Then they took another group of people that lost their ability to walk. Like something happened to them and they were wheelchair bound for the rest of their lives. They studied them. They followed them. What they found was that after 5 years, the overall change in life satisfaction between the two groups was identical. Identical. Think about that. Running into millions of dollars and losing the ability to walk. At the end of the day, just kind of leveled out. Why? Because life does not consist in more, in gaining more. So we hear that, right? And the crowd that Jesus is teaching, they hear that. And they're like, okay, yes, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. We've heard that before, Jesus. We've all seen It's a Wonderful Life. We get it, right? It's a good lesson, right? But Jesus is like, no. You need a story. You need to see how this works out. So Jesus always has a story ready to whip out. So here he goes. He whips out another story. He told him this parable. He said, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Now, there's 3 things going on there. 1, this guy owns ground. He owns land, so he has money. 2, he's rich, which means he's rich. And 3, his land yields an abundant harvest, which means he's getting even more. So Jesus is sitting back. He's like, let me tell you a story about somebody who has more than you. This is the guy who invested in Apple in 1980, right? So the people that are listening in the crowd, they're like, oh, okay. They hear this line. They're like, that's the guy. That's the guy I want to be. Like, once I'm like him, then I'll be fill in the blank. Right? He's the one. He's there. Right? But here's what happens. He gets this abundant harvest, and then he thought to himself, oh no, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. He's actually worried. Like, what if I miss out on the opportunity to accumulate more? And the people that are listening, again, Jesus is teaching a crowd, they're listening, and they're like, are you kidding me, man? Like, you are where I want to be. How do you not see that? And the reason why is because he's on the wheel. He's on the wheel. I bet you there was once a time when he just wanted land. Like, once I have ground, well, then I'll be, right? And I bet you there's another time it was like, well, once my ground yields an abundant harvest, well, then I'll be. And once I have a barn, and and it just keeps going, and he's never happy. And so here he runs into a problem. What if I miss out on the opportunity to get more? He's constantly focused on what could be, on what's out there instead of what's in here. What could be instead of what is. That's this cycle that more puts you on. So he comes up with this brilliant plan. He says, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Barns. Meaning he doesn't just he already has barns that are filled with grain. This is Jesus saying okay, you thought he was rich? He's not just rich. He's stupid rich, right? He's already got barns that are filled with grain, and he still doesn't feel like he has enough. It says, and then I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. You heard what he said? He says, well, once I have, then I'll be. He's still not happy. And if you're listening, you're like, you have already arrived at where I want to be. You already have what I'm chasing. How do you not see that? The thing about the hamster wheel is that it's blinding. It's blinding. Greed robs you of the ability to enjoy what you have today. It totally sucks the joy away from what you have today. Like I said, I bet there was a time where the man wished he was in the situation he was in now. Like, one day maybe I'll have a barn that'll store grain. And there he is, and he's missing it. He's missing it because he's so concerned about what's out there and what could be rather than what's right here and what is. So he's missing it. So here's my question for you. Right now in your life, is it possible that you're missing what's happening today because of what you're going after for tomorrow? And this goes way beyond money. Right? Greed is not just about money. We can want to accumulate experience. We can want to accumulate friends. There's a lot of things we can want for ourselves. And so often we get those things, right? We get what's out there and then we get it in here, but we don't appreciate that it's here because we're still going after what's out there, like constantly over and over and over and over again. I have 2 kids. I've got a 5-year-old, her name's Mia. I have a 3-year-old, his name's Logan. And I love them, but sometimes life is hard with 2 kids. And every once in a while, actually all the time, I find myself being like, you know what? One day, Logan's gonna wipe himself, One day, I'm gonna see something brown on the floor, and my first thought is not gonna be, is that poop? One day, I'm going to look back. I'm going to wonder, did I miss it? Did I miss coming home and having my kids climb on my back? Right? Did I miss those conversations that my kids want to have when they're supposed to be in bed? There are going to be days when my kids don't want to come out of their bedrooms. They don't want to talk to me because I'm not cool. Am I missing what's right here because of what's out there? Don't miss it. Don't miss it because we're on the wheel, because we're constantly looking for more. At the end of the story, God actually makes an appearance. Jesus says, telling the story, he says, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Now, listen, if you grew up in an environment or grew up believing that God was this angry judge, this cosmic killjoy, you're going to read that into this. And that's not the idea here. Right? In the Bible, when we see the word fool, it's way less offensive and more a statement of fact. Like a fool is somebody who spends their time on something accomplishing nothing. Or a fool is somebody who doesn't really give thought to their ways. And what he's saying here is not you're being punished, not now you're going to be killed. He's saying, look what happened. Look what happened. Nothing came out of this. And now your life is over. Who won? Who got anything out of this? Not you, because you were on the wheel the whole time, going after what you didn't have and never appreciating what was right in front of you. So you never made it to where you were trying to go. You never found that feeling of satisfaction that you were after, that you thought more was going to give you. Never. You didn't give your stuff to anybody else, so nobody else won. It was all about you the whole time, and nobody won. It's a tragedy. Nothing good came out of the story. All of this for nothing. Ironically, the story of all this accumulation is actually a story of waste. So then Jesus, he says, this is how it will be. Turning back to the crowd, now the story's over. Right, in the crowd, if you're in the crowd and you're listening to the story about this rich guy, you're like, yeah, what a dummy, right? And Jesus says this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Like, well, wait a second, I thought this was about how it's bad to be rich. No, this is not the idea. The idea here is the story is about people that are just constantly going after more and more and more and more and more. It will end in nothing. It's as if he turns to them and says, look, you were all looking at the rich man, but really, there's a little rich man inside of all of us. I was talking to my friend not too long ago who has some really nice cars, and he was telling me about an issue with one of them. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and I'm like, okay, all right, whatever. I'm thinking about my car. And in my car, I've got this old car, and the rocker panels, like, they just flake because there's so much rust on them. It's a Ford Expedition. It makes all these freaky noises, and the driver's side window doesn't roll down. So I'm the guy, like, at the drive-thru. I, like, open the window, and I'm like, hey, it doesn't roll down. Just hand me the car. Right? It's uncomfortable. But I'm sitting, and I'm thinking about my car, and I'm hearing about, like, the other car. And I'm like, man, like, what I could say is I wish I had your problems. You know what? Last year before I moved to Babylon, there was a guy that I drove by every single day on the way to work. He had like a ton of kids. They had one old minivan that his wife used to get all their kids around. And he walked literally like over 3 miles every single day to get to work. Rain, shine, snow, anything. He was walking every single day with a backpack on, carrying everything he needs for work. And he could look at me and say, okay, your driver's side window doesn't roll down. Man, I wish I had your problem. I have another friend who not too long ago was diagnosed with ALS. And now the muscles in his legs are deteriorating. The muscles in his entire body are deteriorating. He now sits in a chair that he drives with the breath that he blows into a tube. And he could look at my friend who walks to work and say, you walk to work every day, you can walk 3 miles. I wish I had your problems. See, none of us are immune to getting on the wheel. Has nothing to do with how much you make, where you are on the spectrum. It's all about whether we're after what's out there and what could be rather than what's right here and what is. None of us are immune to the wheel. So, what do? How do we stay off the hamster wheel? I think there's really 2 steps. I think there are 2 practices. The first one is gratitude. Gratitude. Gratitude forces us to take our sight off of what's out there and look at what's right here. It forces us to appreciate what is rather than what could be. But it has to be a practice. It's not something that comes naturally. It's more than just saying thank you. It's bringing yourself to a place where you feel thankful. And sometimes it takes a little creativity to do this. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was younger, like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, my aunt gave my sister and I 2 Beanie Babies. Anybody remember Beanie Babies? Yeah, they were supposed to be worth a lot. They're worth nothing now. So there was Bones. They were identical. It was a dog named Bones. It was brown, had these big floppy ears. And the one I was given, for whatever reason, had a crooked eyeball, like it wasn't stitched on right. And I was like, okay, whatever, I'm not going to complain. I just got a free Beanie Baby. So I took it, and I loved this thing. I brought it with me everywhere. It ate cereal with me. It slept in my bed with me. I watched TV with it. It started to smell. Its fur was matted. It was nasty, but I loved Bones. I loved him. I loved him, my best friend. It's a little sad if you think about it. And one day I lose Bones. I can't find him. And I go looking for my mom. I'm like, Mom, I can't find Bones. Where's Bones? Where's Bones? And we're looking all over the house, and we can't find him anywhere. Finally, I hear her, and with the best intention, she's like, I found him. I found Bones. I found Bones. And she pulls him out. She shows me Bones. And Bones is clean. And his eyeball isn't crooked. And he doesn't smell. It was my sister's. And right away, I looked at him, and I was like, that's not Bones. I don't want that. And she didn't know, but I knew. I knew. You see, this was like one of the first times in my life when I wanted something old instead of something new. I wanted something that I had instead of something that I didn't. And it was because I had been through so much with it. And while I didn't have it, I thought about how much it meant to me. And so actually brought myself to a place of gratitude where I didn't want the new thing. And so I'm not kidding. About 4 months ago, I started thinking about, my car, that where the driver's side window doesn't roll down. And every day on the way home from this church, when I'm going that way, I pass this car dealership, and I see this really nice pickup truck. And I would tell my family as we're driving, like, there's Daddy's next car. And I can really convince myself that something's a good decision, even when I know it's not. And I feel myself going down that path where I'm like, I'm not going to be able to afford this, but sooner or later, I'm going to convince myself this is a good choice. I'm not saying it's bad to get a new car. I'm just saying at that time, I knew it was bad. So I stopped, and I was like, how do I take myself from wanting more to being grateful? And I thought about Bones. I thought about how I wanted Bones instead of the new thing because I knew of everything that I had been through. And so as I'm driving in my big, loud, creaky, red truck, I start thinking about how, all those little rusted flakes on the rocker panels are all chipped off. But it was my boys' light-up shoes that chipped them off. And it kind of stinks a little in the car. But there's a milk stain on the ceiling, and it's from the road trip that we took when all of us went to go see my wife's family in Maryland, right? And I thought about how my kids call him Big Red and how hard it would be to tell him that Big Red was gone. And all of a sudden, I start to feel this love for something that I have, and the new shiny truck starts to lose its appeal. And I'm not telling you this because I'm like some expert in gratitude. I always want new things. But what I'm telling you is if we'll take the time to bring ourselves there, I think that's an element of self-control. When we think self-control, we typically think avoiding bad things. What about controlling ourselves to bring us to a good place? Like stirring up our emotions to get ourselves to a point where we're grateful. So we're appreciating what's here and not what's out there. I think another place where this is a big issue is social media. Right? On Instagram, it's just an unending feed of what's out there and what could be and what you don't have. And we spend hours doing it. There's a connection between the rate of depression and the amount of time that somebody spends on social media. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation all the time, but I think that there's a connection there. We're constantly looking at what's out there instead of what's right here. So here's my suggestion to you. What if one time every day, the same time every day, when you picked up your phone to go get on Instagram or get on Facebook, what if one time, instead of doing that, you went into your photo album and you looked at pictures of where you've been, you look at what you've done, you look at the people in your life that mean something to you. You look at the progress that you made. You look at where you've been, where you were a year ago, and I'm telling you, it will start to bring up feelings of gratitude and appreciation. And what you'll see is that gratitude takes you from being poor to being rich. It brings you to the feeling you're looking for when you want something new. But it's a much healthier way. The other thing, step 2, is not just gratitude, it's generosity. As a pastor, I spend a lot of time with people who are in the last hours of their lives, the last days of their lives. And what I can tell you, what I can promise you, is that you, not me, I'm not talking about God, I'm talking about you will assess your life by what you've given, not by what you've gained. You will measure the quality of life by what you've given, not by what you've gained. You will look back with pride on the things you've given, not on the things you've gained. That's just how it works. There's a couple, when we first started this church, they sat us down with, I first found out how much money I was going to have to fundraise. I kind of wanted to cry. And I'm sitting down with these people, and they said, we've never been able to do this, but we've been planning on doing this. We've been trying to do it, and we're going to sacrifice so that we can. And they wrote us a check for $10,000 for this church. And they did it with tears in their eyes. And I guarantee you there is not going to be a moment when they regret that. I guarantee you they will never forget the sacrifice they made to get this church off in the right direction. Those are the moments that make life feel rich. There's another person on our team that gives pretty significant gifts to the church on a pretty regular basis. And every time it comes up between me and him, he looks at me and he tries to keep us cool every time, but every time his eyes fill up with tears because it costs him something. But there is something that is so rich about giving to something that's outside yourself. And so here's what I'd suggest to you. Budget to give. Budget to give. And I'm aware, there are people on Long Island that have been avoiding church because they think that the church is just in this for the money. The church makes you feel guilty because we want your money. If you feel that way, I would rather that you never give to us as a church. But you should still give somewhere, because you will look back on your life and you will measure the quality of life by what you've given. I don't care if it's the church or if it's somewhere else. But if you hoard it all for yourself, you will feel like you got nothing in return. So does more equal better? I don't know exactly. Sometimes it definitely can. But what I can tell you for sure is that gratitude and generosity will prevent your gain from becoming greed. You can have more, and you can do more with more, and you should try to be the best you can. But don't make your life about your gain. And when you do gain, if you bring generosity and gratitude into the equation, that is what makes your life rich. That will make your life rich. Here's where we'll close. This all works, I believe. This works this way because we were made in the image of a God who is unbelievably generous. Some of us here in this community think that God wants something from us when God wants something for us. He has given us more than we could ever possibly imagine. And we're told in the scriptures that he enjoys that. He loves to give. In fact, the cross that so many of us have seen so many times, some of us see that and we think okay, that means that I've got to pay God back, or that now there's a debt that I owe him. When really it means the exact opposite. It should be a reminder to you that your debt has been paid by Jesus. It should be a reminder to you that there is nothing that God wouldn't give to win your heart. And when we get that, it'll lead us closer to him. It'll change the way we think about him. It'll make us grateful. It'll make us generous. And maybe we will start to feel like we've found what we're looking for. Let's pray together. God, you have given us more than we'll ever be able to wrap our minds around. You are so generous, so generous. God, you've given us the ability to smile, the ability to experience joy, happiness, the ability to love, the ability to have relationships. God, you have given us so, so, so much. Would you bring us to a place where we are grateful? In those moments when we want more, when we're tempted to get on the wheel and start running, God, would you stop us and remind us that you have put so much before us that we have to be grateful for? And would you make us people who are generous? Not just for the sake of the people that will receive what we give, but for our own sakes. So that one day, at the end of our lives, we will look back and feel like we have spent what we have well. That we've invested in something that is far beyond us, whether it's a church or the people we meet on the streets or the people we work with. God, make us the kind of people that want to give things away so that we would be like children of our Father in heaven. In Jesus' name we pray.